So let's compare the iPhone 16e with the older iPhone 10s. First, let's start off with the price. The 16e, brand new, is $600. iPhone 10s, not being sold anymore, launched with a $1,000 price tag, but now in 2025, you could find it for as low, I've seen it for $100. 16e, I've seen it on prepaid, on Boost for $300. So you are getting these devices for very cheap, but the overall cheaper device will be the 10s. Now quickly, let's go over just the outside of these devices. The 16e and the 10s from the front both have a notch at the top, so they're very similar in the front. Flip them over to the back, you see a difference. 16e has a single megapixel or a single 48 megapixel camera. The 10s has a very old setup. It has two cameras on the back. But nothing like we have now in 2025 with three cameras on the Pro phone. So the 10s is really a throwback to a long time ago. But you flip the devices over to the bottom, you have USB Type-C, and the 16e 10s has that Lightning. So that's the quick overview of the outside of the device. It's still modern looking for the 10s, and in some respect the 16e does look a little bit dated having that notch, because now we live in a world of dynamic islands, so it's a tie right there for the 16e and the 10s. Neither of them have the dynamic island. So like I mentioned, these devices are separated by a lot of years. We have a 2025 16e versus a 2018 10s. So there's a huge gap in there. Both of these devices are very similar in size, but the 10s is just more compact just by a bit, and it just weighs a little bit more than the 16e, which is very lightweight in its own right. Build material, glass front, glass back on both of these devices, but you have aluminum frame on the 16e versus stainless steel on the 10s. So the 10s has a slightly better build quality if you rock these phones without a case. SIM cards, the 16e has eSIM only, while the 10s has a nano SIM and an eSIM, so that's actually a positive. That's better than the 16e, very flexible. Both are dust and water resistant, but the 16e is submersible for 6 meters versus the 2 meters on the 10s. And again, we're moving on to the display, and both of them are having a Super Retina display, but unfortunately, neither the 10s or the 16e have a high refresh rate of 120 hertz. They don't have ProMotion like today's Pro iPhones. They have the older, slower 60 hertz refresh rate, so kind of disappointing right there. You have a super new phone with a super old phone, and they're rocking the same screen technology, so that's not good. It's not good for the 16e in that regard. Size-wise, again, 6.1 inch versus the more compact 10s, so that's kind of like a good thing for the 10s. It kind of stands out having that more compact body. And it also had 3D touch on the 10s, so that's kind of another thing that separates these two in the display department. Talking about software, iOS 18 on the 16e when it was launched, and you have iOS 12 when the 10s launched, although both of them are currently rocking the newest version of iOS 18. But the 16e is obviously brand new. It'll get 7 years of updates. The 10s, I do not think it will get any more updates, and it's stuck on iOS 18, but we'll see. Apple tends to surprise us. Same thing with the chipset. You have A18 processor on the 16e versus A12 Bionic on the 10s. You know, older device, older chipset. Obviously, you have more performance out of that A18 chip. It's the same chip found actually on the 16 and the 16 Pro, so that's very impressive for the 16e. And also, let's move on to storage. The 128 gigs is the starting storage for the 16e, double that of the 64 gigs on the 10s. Same thing with the RAM, 8 gigs versus 4 gigs on the 10s. So obviously the internals of these devices are very different. I think this is the strongest point of the 16e, is that it has all the same internals pretty much as a 16 and a 16 Pro, but at a $600 cheaper price point. The specs of the XS internally are still good for today's standards, but moving on into the future, these are not good for future years to come. You will get slowdowns and performance issues. Now let's go back to those cameras. Single 48 megapixel shooter on the 16E, which takes great videos, great pictures. The XS has a 12 megapixel main shooter and a 12 megapixel telephoto. So you have that extra camera that gives you an extra option of shooting video and pictures, but noticeably it is missing the ultra wide camera. Both shooting 4K. On the back, selfie camera's 4K for the 16E, 1080p on the XS. So it's kind of hard to decide here, but I think that the XS still takes great pictures, and you have that extra option of having telephoto. But Apple is really hyping up its single lens camera on the 16E. But I would say, I'm gonna say it's a tie. I think most people taking regular pictures won't really notice having that telephoto. They won't really miss it. But they, it's kind of a tie right there in the picture department. Bluetooth 5.3 on the 16E versus 5.0 on the XS. Not a huge difference, but charging, like I mentioned, newer USB Type-C on the 16E versus Lightning on the XS. If you use this just for charging, it's not too much of a big deal, but USB-C is the standard now, and you could charge all of your devices with the same cable, so advantage on the 16E. Unlocking your device is actually very similar. Face ID on both of these devices. They're hidden in that notch up top, and all I gotta say is the 16E might be a slight hair faster on Face ID than the one on the XS, but for as old as the XS is, it has the same technology to unlock your device as the newer 16E. And moving on to battery life, you're gonna get all-day battery life on both of these devices, but the 16E will get you a lot more than the XS. It's 26 hours of video playback, the most in any iPhone in a 6.1-inch screen size. The XS, it has a smallish battery compared to today's standards, but you're still gonna get most of the day with battery life. 50% charge in 30 minutes, has Qi wireless charging, same thing as the 16E, but neither of these have MagSafe or super fast charging or Qi 2 charging either. So very limited charging options with in the battery department, but you do just get on a full charge. The 16E has a crazy battery life. So externally, both of these devices are very similar. They're both modern looking phones, although they don't have dynamic island. So I think that's kind of a advantage on the XS. It doesn't look as old when you compare it to the 16E. And on the back, the XS still has 2 cameras versus 1. They both have 60 hertz refresh rate on both. So externally, these devices, the XS is actually kind of better in that regard. It's nice to have USB Type-C, and the 16E, you can get it to charge all your devices and use one cable. XS, you're rocking Lightning. That's kind of a bummer for some people. But internally, this is where you see the big advantage of having the 16E technology now built in. Lots of RAM, lots of a newer chipset, and you have the extra amount of internal storage starting off. But on an everyday use case, if you use it for very non-heavy duty things like calls, social media, taking a quick picture, airdrop, text, just all that regular stuff, browsing the web, watching movies, watching YouTube, you're not gonna find much difference in the performance. But if you're starting to download lots of games, if you're doing any type of editing on these phones, and just in general, if you're just using your phone for a lot of different apps, now it's the 16E will handle them way better. And the 16E is more of a future device. It's built for Apple Intelligence, and it's going to be good for 7 years from now. The XS, it is old school when it comes to the internals. Battery life is not that good, and you have a Lightning on there. The 16E standout, battery life, very important. That's probably going to get a lot of people to buy this one for the battery life alone. So yeah, the iPhone XS, I'd still rock it today, wouldn't have any issues with it, but the 16E just gets me with that battery life and the lower entry level price for similar specs as the 16 and the $1,000 iPhone 16 Pro. So that's been my comparison of the 16E and the iPhone XS in 2025.